Professor Namyong Lee's commentary, long. Party leader Jang Dong-hyuk must reform politics into a youth-centered party, an expert network party, and a party of public empathy and solidarity. At a press conference on January 7, 2026, party leader Jang Dong-hyuk declared that he would open the era of 2 million responsible party members and build a time in which party members become the true owners of the party. He further stated that the new party would be built as a youth-centered party. In fact, the People Power Party has already institutionalized a youth standard within its core operating mechanism. Article 12, Composition, Paragraph 6 of its party constitution explicitly specifies under 45 years of age in the composition of convention delegates, thereby embedding a youth benchmark into the rules of party governance. Korea's population under 45 currently stands at 24 million, about 47% of the total population. This single line is an order. Do not consume youth as a slogan, but fix youth as a rule of power and representation. Jang Dong-hyuk's leadership now appears to carry a strong determination to pursue transparency and eradicate corruption. Until now, however, his leadership has looked far too powerless. I hope that the strong reform will he displayed at the January 7, 2026 press conference becomes a real opportunity for the party to rise up decisively and stop the runaway governing style of the Lee Jae-myung administration. It is desirable that Jang Dong-hyuk's leadership has presented party innovation as a three-axis architecture of youth demand, expert supply, and solidarity distribution. This is not merely a declaration of replacing figures or competing slogans, it signals an intention to redesign the party structurally. Innovation is not an emotional purge, it is a reallocation of relationships, and reallocated relationships are nothing other than redesigned rules. The principle of changing everything except the party members becomes real only at this exact point, because vested interests are reproduced not by titles, but by relationship structures. If the new party being built under Jang Dong-hyuk's leadership sets its demand around youth, that demand must be reflected in the final output of nominations. In political parties, nominations are not a prelude to elections. They are the substance of power. Who holds nominations and how determines the flow of policy, organization, funding, and messaging. Therefore, the requirement to mandate at least 30% youth nominations in the June 3, 2026 local elections is not a moral recommendation. It is a structural necessity. 30% is not a number of consideration. It is the threshold at which a new group begins to meaningfully shake an organization's decision-making power. If the party cannot cross that line, youth will be consumed as faces placed in front, while real power will again revert to the inertia of vested interests. International statistics repeat a simple fact. The generation positioned at the stage of entering the labour market, securing housing and forming families is structurally more unstable, and that instability simultaneously erodes growth, fiscal sustainability, and social trust. In such a moment, what a political party must do is not to craft sentences saying, "We care about youth," but to extract policy requirements from the point where instability is most concentrated, select the people who can solve it through nominations, and distribute it through solidarity until it becomes institutionalized. In other words, once demand is defined, the entire process of supply and distribution must be subordinated to that demand. That is architecture. If we translate Jang Dong-hyuk's three-axis architecture into party operations, demand sets requirements, supply manufactures those requirements into packages of policy, law and budget, and distribution delivers the results through empathy, solidarity, and institutionalization. In this structure, nominations are the decisive interface where demand, supply, and distribution meet. If the party declares demand as youth, supply as experts, and distribution as solidarity, yet leaves nominations unchanged, the architecture collapses at the doorstep. Conversely, if nominations change, the rest will follow. Candidates must be verified not by factional lines, but by performance and capability. Party members must function not as mobilized bodies, but as evaluators and shareholders. Expert networks must compete not through name lists, but through deliverables. The first function performed by a 30% youth nomination rule is to structurally weaken the possibility of collusion between nominations and money. Vested interest nominations inevitably take the form of transactions. Personal connections and organizational mobilization create an unofficial price around the nomination power, and candidates are evaluated more by mobilization capacity than by achievements. But the large-scale entry of a new generation makes transaction costs explode and destabilizes the transaction itself. When transaction costs rise, rules come alive. Raising the youth ratio is therefore not moral preaching. It is sealing the interface through which corruption passes. The second function is to change the relationship between party members and candidates. In a structure where candidates obtain nominations by leaning on a particular power holder or faction, party members are always consumed. In a structure where candidates are verified by real problem-solving results in the local community and by policy design capability, party members become the selecting subject. When relationships change, responsibility changes. When responsibility changes, the quality of politics changes. The third function is to elevate the quality of policy. If a party is to become youth-led, policy must be blueprints, not slogans. An expert supply chain must be proven by deliverables, not names. Housing stability must be bundled into a single package that ties together increased supply, stability in the rental market, and reduced financing costs. Job policy must be connected not to short-term subsidies, but to occupational transitions, industrial reallocation, and the design of regional job ecosystems. Education policy must not strengthen a credentials arms race. It must reduce the entry costs into the labour market. Care policy must become infrastructure that lowers families' cost of survival. Policies of this kind can be produced only when experts deliver them, and the party operates as a system of quality control. However, youth nominations must not be misunderstood as a simple age quota. The core is soundness. Soundness must be judged in three ways. First, actual experience in solving real problems. Second, the capability to design or execute policy. Third, reputation capital accumulated through trust, not through money or organization. These criteria must be inserted as quantitative items into the nomination evaluation scorecard, and the evaluation process must remain as records and procedures. Without procedure, evaluation becomes a personal power holder. Without records, transactions revive. Therefore, nomination innovation must be completed not by goodwill, but by systems. The distribution axis of solidarity also requires dignity. Person-centered alliances break easily and lose legitimacy easily. The new party's solidarity must not be an alliance against someone, but an alliance around agenda. It must fix livelihoods, growth, security, and fairness as shared commitments, and build a contractual structure that delivers these commitments through local ordinances, budgets, and administration. For a party to design distribution does not mean publicity that merely transmits messages. It means designing a pathway that drives policy into institutions. The conclusion is simple. Changing a party name is changing the signboard. Changing nomination rules is changing the flow of power. The public looks at flows, not signboards. If Jang Dong-hyuk's new party is to abandon past vested interests and meet the public's expectations, it must change nominations. And to change nominations, it must stamp 30% youth nominations, not as a declaration, but as a rule. This is the coupling point that connects the three-axis architecture of party reform to the real structure of power. It is also the fastest and most accurate way to prove the pledge to change everything except the party members in the new Liberal Conservative Party being built. I strongly recommend the following. First, insert the 30% youth nomination rule into party regulations as a mandatory clause and minimize exceptions. Second, apply the same standard to winnable districts, because only then does power actually move. Third, include quantitative standards of soundness in the nomination scorecard and mandate recording of the evaluation process so that corrupt transactions disappear. Fourth, operate the expert supply chain not as a list of names, but as delivery of packages of policy, law, budget, and performance indicators. Fifth, lock solidarity not as a merger of personalities, but as an agenda contract. When these 5 elements operate simultaneously, Jang Dong-hyuk's new party can stand before the nation as a dignified, youth-led party. Thank you for watching Professor Namyong Lee's commentary. Long.